1470s in the court of Naples. In fact, it was a wedding gift to Beatrice Barry. And it contains, although Naples, it actually contains mostly French song. We have been working on and off on this repertoire for over a year now, singing from the facsimile of the original manuscript, and it looks something like that. It's rather pretty. One of the challenges of singing from this kind of source is that, well, it's rather small. This is actually the size. I shrank it to the size of, the original, more or less. Is the text, and so the one concession we've made is to put the text and the translation up here, because it's rather difficult to read unless you're used to this script. But the text is not given for the lower parts, it's only for the top part. So it's a bit like hymn singing, if you can imagine that. Yes, you have your melody there, and then you have your words here, and you sort of, your eyes are drawn back and forth, as you interpret it. So we've got 3 songs for you, and they are of very various styles. The first and second are by a composer called Antoine Dunois, who was active in the court of Burgundy, and also in the Loire Valley area where the French monarchy was based in the 1460s, 1470s, and his style is, I suppose you might say, distinctively more modern than the style of the last piece we're going to hear. So there is what we call imitation between the parts. One voice sings a tune and then another picks it up. The sort of thing that we find a lot in later Renaissance music, typically Bird and Palestrina, all these sorts of composers all use imitation. By then it's become the lingua franca of composition. But in this period it's very, very new. The third piece is by a composer called Wickham, and it is very different. And in fact, of all the 10 songs that we've learned from Mellon and Chansonnier, the Wickham is by far the hardest in terms of interpretation. It's because stylistically, tonally, it's constantly in motion, it's shifting all the time. And I think you may hear that difference. It's a more, well, if I'd say archaic sound, that might be deceptive because it's probably written around the same time, but there's just something, a quality about it which is really rhapsodic, and some musicologists call it irrational. It doesn't have any of these structural limitations. So the groups will introduce their individual pieces in terms of the text. We're going to start with one called Bel Accueil, and this is a rondo. So that means that there's constant repetition of the first part of it. Bel Accueil, Fair Welcome, is about, well, Fair Welcome is one of these allegorical figures from medieval Romance poetry, who is the kind of aide de camp of love itself. So you've got to get the good graces of fair welcome in order then to move on to court your lady. It's the first song in the entire manuscript, which I think is significant. Fair welcome. There's a sort of welcoming aspect here. We introduce the whole plethora of romantic emotions from A to B. And the other interesting thing about this song is that it's for 3 equal voices. So that's also quite unusual. So, shall we do it?
And we're essentially saying, go away, you're really annoying, let all the young people come and frolic, and take your bags and bundles elsewhere. So if you can imagine us being sort of rather jaunty and silly about it. There's actually another quite similar poem, which has been sort of matched to this one and translated by a chap called Warwick, who's going to be speaking at our symposium on Saturday. And it's an even more saucy translation, a sort of double entendre meaning, which gets quite saucy. So thankfully we'll be singing the clean version today.
Oh, So this one, third one is by a different composer, again. It's also in a different form. We've just had rondos, a rondo, which repeats the same first bit again and again. This is a ballade. So it's a slightly different format. Again, it's repetition. We go through sort of section A first. We're going to be turning the page. And in fact, the scribe has even written verso folio, a little reminder written to the tenor parts that he needs to turn the page. And then go on to another section, which would be, and then we come back to the original twice. And this piece is a sad one. This is with sort of touch of irony, and it gets quite bitter, I would say, in the second section. It starts, Ma bouche crie et mes pensées pleurent, mon œil se jouait et mon cœur maudit pleure, which translates to, my lips laugh and my thoughts weep, my eye is gay and my heart curses the hour. Bad things happen, so it's very much the struggles of somebody who's putting on a good show, but it has a lot in it. Yes.
I'll start. And it's more to do with, I know it's something we've been working, we have a symposium on Saturday, it's the slight plug for our CEMC symposium, which is going on Saturday, where we will be talking about the text and the music and what happens with the performers whilst they're analysing the text as they're singing it and how they place syllables, etc., etc. I'm wondering whether you guys have had any thoughts whilst you've been doing this, and this goes to any of the singing group, as to whether or not there's some of these parts may have been instrumental or vocal. And this is something we're going to discuss on Saturday, so I'm giving you a chance to just pre-condition your mind a little bit in that sense. But is anything that you've kind of thought of whilst you've been singing any of these parts?
Yeah, well, I mean, particularly in my part, the notes don't, well, the phrases don't seem to fit the lines of text very clearly. So something like which we started with, there's some very definite points where I'm meant to finish the line of the text. It kind of makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, it just kind of keeps going. It's basically a very musical phrase, which just you happen to have to fit words to.
Sure.
That is, I mean, you can. We've decided on places where we kind of come together in terms of words, and also there's imitative parts where you usually kind of play on what other people are doing.
Yeah.
But I mean, certainly it doesn't seem to have been. The music doesn't seem to, at least in my part, to have been written with a verse framework in mind.
Sure. I mean, certainly from my perspective, I don't know if anybody else would really disagree with this, but the cantos part, you do get. Yeah, that's the top part, sorry. You do get a very strong conditioning of the text from Emma's.
Yeah, most of my phrases, it might take a little bit of playing with it, singing it through without the notes, getting used to the shape of the phrase, then learning the text, and then working out how it best fits. It's not always completely clear, but usually you can find something that really does sort of make sense. It's like, oh, this was meant to go with these words.
But the other two, I certainly felt it's very hard to gauge where you're at with it. You're doing very musical things in that sense, and you're obviously thinking about how to make it as musical as possible. But it's interesting, it would be interesting to hear a few depictions of you placing it in different places, because I wonder if it would make an audible difference to the person listening or not. It's an interesting subject.
There's a couple of moments in our Moonwalk piece in Jarion's part where it's do for the occasions, and it feels like something that would be very easily done on like a bowed instrument.
For an instrument tuned and forced to fit, it's significantly easier.
Yeah, whereas
vocally,
it's not that usually.
Another thing we've noticed from an emotive point of view, from a performance point of view, a lot of, particularly this one and a lot of others that we've done, are often very intense emotionally, and they are often in the first person. This one is, and so as the top part, it very much feels like I am telling a story, and so we've been trying to sort of work on a balance where I speak out and say this is happening in the arm accompaniment.
Yeah.
When you have sort of three voices all going for it, it kind of diffuses the emotive intensity, because it's somehow sort of spread out. People are saying things different times. Whereas when there's a real focus on one part where the text is first and foremost really important, then all of that intense emotional and text, the poetry, is funneled through one voice.
A fascinating compliment to that actually is certainly my experience having done some of lots of this music, that actually you can, as an accompanying part, or one of the lower voice parts, which usually are the accompanying parts, you can really overdo it with a singer. So it's really easy to try and be too musical about it and to become one with the other parts, so you're on an equal footing, and actually you end up overdoing it and the music suffers as a consequence. I was really struck actually by how, I wouldn't say, I'm trying to think of the right word, I would call it muted, but not in a negative way. You guys were in a really beautiful, you did it wonderfully well. But actually it does allow the first part that is telling that story to come across, which surely has to be how it was intended in that sense, because the other parts, as you say, whether or not they're nicely written from a musical perspective, they definitely don't have the same direction as the cantos part. So, is there any questions from afar?
If the words were only, well, the text was only under the top part, does that imply that the lower parts might not be instrumental?
What do you think? Well, it's
Which I don't.
you've only so theological debate, which goes back 50 years, or you wouldn't believe how vitriolic this kind of stuff gets. And it, not least because it, you know, professional performers invest so much in it, you know, that if you've got a group which has just all the singers, that of course they're determined that this music is all vocal. And if you have a group with a bunch of instruments and one singer, then they're determined to prove that the evidence from them is very sort of, well, unfortunately it doesn't fall neatly into one camp or other. There are, for instance, Chansonnier, in which all the parts are texted. I mean, the most famous one is the chordiform one, which is this beautiful love heart-shaped one. So all the parts are texted, or there's some manuscripts which have 2 parts texted. So, you know, it's not, we also have, you know, pictorial evidence of singers all gathered around and singing. So the trouble with the instrument versus voice sort of debate is that actually with good singers, like these guys, you know, they can make anything sound convincing. Similarly, there's no, you know, it doesn't seem to me that there's such a thing as a naturally instrumental part. I mean, notwithstanding what you say about, you know, there are lots of lines which might seem rather craggy, but you know, quite often they don't seem to be any more instrumental than they are vocal. So I think you know, it's a hard one. I have to say that there are certain songs where I think I probably veer towards the, you know, that one in particular, towards instrumental.
Is it that some of these would have been in a variety of different manuscripts originating in different areas of Europe, right, as well? That's the other thing. So is there a possibility of locality in terms of different, so certain places utilising singers and some instruments, or that's something which I'm not sure musically has been discussed quite so much. Right?
Yes, I'm not sure that it has. But I mean, if you go a century later to the way that sort of the songs of William Byrd and all these sorts of composers are printed, and they are presented to the public as being either vocal or instrumental. So I don't see why that can't actually be the default for this period as well. That it's, you know, it's fluid. Actually.
And just a slightly proud thing, I think, I would mention these guys being very good, and I think it's actually important to say that reading this kind of stuff, this is not a normal occurrence. You do not see this. You can go anywhere else in the UK and you will not find singers either of a professional idiom or of a student idiom who are able to do this. So the fact that they're even addressing these kind of concerns is quite staggering. And I was going to ask earlier about the situation when you get lost, because this is one of the things, right? So you will notice occasionally that somebody looks a little bit worried around slightly afraid, and that's a natural occurrence when you're reading from manuscripts. It happens to every single one of us. And it's a very strange situation to find yourself in. I was going to ask if everybody might kind of try and explain what's going through one's mind around it, because it's not the same as when you have a score or anything to say, right?
Quite a few swallows normally. But I think or in my head at least, when I got out, like I did at the end of our piece, it's going to go, I don't know where I am, and then just trying to like hit the refresh button, and then just listen for where it is, because, you know, we kind of all kind of, you know, it takes a lot of work to get these off the page and learning, and still in the process of learning how to read them. So then kind of by just kind of refreshing my brain and just kind of listening to it, I can then work out where I am just already now. But that's not something I would have been able to do a year ago or even 6 months ago. Like, that's very much something that happens the more you read from the manuscript.
Yeah, it's also slightly a different way of coming at music, to be honest. So you can't read in the same way that you might do in any other choir music telephones and read. You actually have to basically memorize it to the extent of, like a few times in the performance of that last song, for example, we'd kind of be singing the line and reading the text, and I've lost my place in the manuscript. And think, okay, the melody carries on like this. I'm not entirely sure how much I can remember of the melodies. I'm going to find my place, and so you kind of find yourself basically the melody you know so well that it just carries on going. It's also sort of written in a way that the phrases are quite memorable themselves.
That will also depend on the other people in your group having the ability to think, oh, Helen's got help. Okay, I'm going to keep going. We trust that she'll work something out.
You get used to singing a few solo passages along the way.
And also phonetically, I don't know about the chorals, the poems, a lot of the syllables and the phonemes are the same first verse.
Yeah.
So it's easier, so the brains will routine a little more easily, because you know, this comes there, and that syllable, that vowel is in that place.
We speak a lot about oral retention, and the fact that we don't get that a lot from most of the time in a kind of standard choir environment nowadays. We come in and we see something, and it's a bit of a running joke among singers that they'll sing something on Evensong, and then they'll pick up the same piece next week and say, "Have I sung this before?" Because it's once the piece is gone, it's gone. You know, it's gone out of the head, and you're on to the next thing. And this almost works in the exact opposite way to that, whereby you retain it to the point whereby things are memorable, but they're also memorable, I find, in context. So they're not necessarily lines that you would walk around singing that would be memorable to a person, but as soon as somebody else starts singing, as soon as you're in a three-voice environment and the other voices start, the context is so clear. And I wonder if this is something to do with tonality, because there is not very much shifting tonality in this era of music, whereby you start and you have a final in the same place. So you're really rooted in a certain kind of harmonic environment. So you know where you are, you know where you can and you can't be from a counterpoint perspective, and therefore it's a little bit easier to kind of recognise your place.
Yeah, you definitely know when you're out. Like you can hear it very, very, very clearly. But actually, there is quite, especially in the opera actually, there's quite a lot of shifting harmonies that like you can clock on. If you have got out, you can clock. Oh yeah, it's a bit that goes kind of. It sounds like that, and you can kind of latch on. So if you know how your part goes, and
amongst somebody else,
Yeah, and in rehearsal as well, we find these specific points, we call them clock points, where maybe we come to a cadence or just specific spots or like a new bit of text starts that we can sort of latch onto in our memory. And so if we get lost, we can sort of look for the next one of those and then maybe try to come in there.
When the music goes gospel.
Yeah.
You suddenly see the rehearsal go.
Or the trick is when you, like I got out the second time through this near the end in the final line, and that's the trickiest, because then you just have to listen for when they're cadencing and then come in on the final note.
I mean, one of the wonderful things, and to me it's genuinely a joy to actually be able to talk in an open environment about something which would be classified as a mistake, which is it is such an important thing to be able to address those, because actually being able to be a better musician requires you to address mistakes and to work out why and to work out how to solve and to adapt. And especially when you're performing on stage where things don't go right a lot of the time, to be honest. The people who can adapt best tend to be the people who continue to make music at that level for the rest of their life. So it's a really important thing. Is there any further?
Yeah, who have been singing this music in the 15th century? These are all secular songs, obviously.
No. Well, I mean, obviously, secular. Who would have been singing this?
Because obviously you have to be a pretty skilled singer to be able to do that. I can't imagine you're a strolling minstrel to be able to do it.
No, minstrels weren't taught to read notation.
Yeah.
So they are skilled singers, educated. In the Burgundian court, for instance, there was a group of singers employed for the music in the chapel, and then there was another group employed music in the chamber. And Benoit was in that second list, actually, although he did write sacred. And the Gundian court's quite unusual in that it's fed by musicians who are educated in specific choir schools which are set up by the Gundian Jews, Philip the Good in particular. So there's this whole sort of infrastructure which is...
Would it be female voices, or would it be
it's, well, in a court scenario, unlikely. Falsettos probably, but in the, in aristocratic chamber music, otherwise, there's no reason to suppose not. We don't have any women listed in those groups of musicians, professional musicians.
I could talk about this all day, to be honest. We better stop because we've gone past our, and there is one more question, so we'll have one final one.
I actually have two, but I think they're both very quick. And this may be a very naive question for singers of this caliber. How is it that you all so precisely have the pitch in the first entrance?
so either one, so Jonathan has...
He's got a tuning fork.
Yeah, we've got various tuning forks, or you can get those on the phone.
So I wasn't aware of that when you got up.
No, that's alright, we're trained to be subtle.
So it was there. You don't all have it.
No,
It's full child, yeah. The second thing is your symposium on Saturday open to the public, and what are the details?
Yeah, but so we're at St Catherine's College, and starts at 11, and yeah, you do very well.
We have some talk with Warwick is giving a presentation in the morning on this, and there will also be some singing throughout the day.
Yeah.
And we'll go.
I mean, if you prefer the singing to the talking, then probably the afternoon session from 2 is more, from about 2:30, and we'll be in the chapel.
Is it on St. Catherine's website?
No, it's not.
Internally organised.
I suspect.
Is that on Saturday?
It's on Saturdays.
Are we allowed to come?
Yes. Yeah, it's open to the public.
Good.
Okay, well, thank you to and briefly next week.
So next week is our final workshop of the year, sadly. This is the end of the university term. But we're doing myself and Connor, Charlie and Rob, who've done various other workshops, so you might recognise them. We're singing some pieces from Musical Chansonnier, which is one of the first books of printed madrigals in England, and we're doing some full voice music from that, so do come along and see us. Thursday. No, that's all right.